So the concept of no magic, I think a lot of people will resonate with. I feel like that the first request response, like player in the game, was like remix and like leaning into those web fundamentals was a big part. But one thing that kind of like sticks out to me a little bit is that Redwood SDK is built around RSC and all the stuff you said about magic and like just the things happening without the developer knowing, I'd say do apply to React server components because they are kind of like a very new thing, require deep bundler integration to get right, and do kind of hide a lot of magic that's going on. So how does that like kind of play into that ideal?
So I think that I don't really see the magic anymore because I've implemented RSC twice now. Um, so really, RSC is just request to the server. If say for instance you're running an action, man, I could be really wrong here, and like someone's like, nope, that guy's wrong. This is my current understanding of RSC. Um, so say for instance you have a client component and you want to perform an action. Uh, you click a button, the action gets executed. Um, that's sent to a server over fetch, and it has like a whole bunch of stuff at the back of the URL. So it'll be like uh, a local host 8910 question mark RSC underscore action, and then it will have a whole bunch of data. Your server will pick that up and it will say, hey, oh, this guy's trying to perform an action. It'll break it apart, figure out what the action was that you were trying to perform, and it will run the function. And then it will return the response of that function along with the newly rendered state of the page that you're currently on. Um, and then that gets diffed on the client, and then you get the new data. So to me, it actually seems really simple. And it's also based on the fundamentals of how we're building software request response. And the state is just pushed to the server. That's your source of truth. So from my perspective, it feels really easy, much better to build software in with React Server components than it has felt to build it with other things.
This is an interesting area for me. I've spent a lot of time in the last several years working on APIs coming from like a front end full stack perspective. And I've used tRPC and GraphQL and REST APIs and basically everything else. And there are some like real challenges building an API for like there's this concept of backend for front end, which like people are moving more and more towards. So I think like things like Next.js and Remix and all these meta frameworks are sort of like backends for front ends. You're writing like these functions that are exposed directly to your front end code. Like getting them right can be hard. You need sort of like a good meta framework experience in a lot of cases just to make it like easy to reason about. And there are some, RPC libraries like tRPC, and they just have so much boilerplate, and it's like kind of hard to wrap your head around. So it's like the interesting thing for React server components to me is that you're essentially exposing an RPC interface in a way that like is ostensibly simpler, and especially when you're thinking about the encapsulation of like front end code and server code in this like one component graph. Um, I still think there's like more UX work for the React team to do there because it's like there are these situations where you get into that are just kind of awkward. It's like, oh, where you're trying to use a client component or a server component in this like client component context or something. I don't know. There's like this situation where it starts breaking down, and there's still some UX things, especially around like, I don't know, just giving good errors, like helping people understand the modality, like how to think about these things. And I think that'll be a thing that everyone building on React server components, including Redwood, will have to like grapple with a little bit. It's like, how do we really educate users on like the data flow and how things are happening? Even though it's like one of those things where it like seems simpler, you're like writing less code, you're doing less extraneous types, there's less boilerplate, you're getting closer to the point of just expressing what you want to have happen and it happening, which I think is the ultimate goal with all of this, is like choosing the right abstractions, not to have to write a ton of code to do a really simple thing. But I think there are still these seams where it's just like the UX and DX still need a little bit of pushing there. I think that's a React
I,
ecosystem thing.
I think that's totally fair. And, those things have tripped me up as well. And I'd be like, we also have a Justin on our team, and I'd say, hey, Justin, this just isn't working. I think we have a bug. And he's like, Peter, you're doing it wrong. You're actually passing you can't use a server component like this. And I'd be like, oh, of course. Okay. Yeah. Let me try and remember this for next time. And then it tripped one of our other team members up, same error. And I was like, oh, I've seen this one before. This is what you're doing wrong. And he's like, okay. So you're not wrong. I think we can improve that, definitely. And I think the fact that there's such mysticism around it is probably not a good sign. And this is why we are entering the conversation with Redwood SDK. We want to clarify what's happening and make it easier to understand, without all those layers of abstraction that just feels like you're not doing just a normal network request. So yeah, that's our goal, is really to bring React Server components to a group of people that want to build simpler software.
I think the nice thing about this approach, and the thing that's really attracted me to Redwood, which I'm like building a bunch of stuff with Redwood SDK right now. I think the nice thing is just that I'm learning more about React, and I'm not learning more about like some other RPC framework, like that's good. That's nice. I like that.
Yeah. And I have this like really spicy hot take that I like to share, which is like, you have a limited amount of time on Earth, and you're going to spend that time learning something. Why would you spend it learning some big corporate's tools? And you could Facebook or Meta is a corporate, Redwood JS is a corporate, but we're not going to try and sell you $20 a month hosting. We want to enable you to make a living off the software you're writing, and maybe we take a cut of that. So learn our thing. It isn't an abstraction. It's really going to give you a fundamental understanding of how the web works, and you can use that anywhere. Or that might not be true for other tools.
Yeah, it's weird when you start leaning into like the browser's capabilities, like when you haven't for a very long time. Like I've been a web developer for 13 years, and I didn't learn about how form elements worked until probably like 4 or 5 years ago. Now it just like it sticks with me, and I try to lean into that, and it's way better. But like we have lived through an era where like almost everything about the web platform was abstracted away.
Totally. I remember like trying to upload files with some kind of like jQuery plugin that somehow gave you a progress bar, and it was wild. And I was super surprised to see how easy it is to upload a file in Redwood SDK. Like create a form, push that form up using fetch, grab the file out of the form data in the server handler, and just stream it directly into R2. It's like 4 lines of code. And then retrieving it and sending back to the client is the same operation, just reversed. It's just fetch, and then you're just streaming it over the wire. It just feels so right. You're like, wow, someone really thought this through. It wasn't me. I just gave you all the dots to connect it with.
Cool. So you built this all around CloudFlare, and that seems to be a central thing that is very important. Do you plan to expand it to other platforms in the future?
Right now, no. I think, one of the problems that we had with Redwood JS is that we stalled on growth, and I want to make sure that we're serving a group of people really well. And I think Cloudflare's positioning is so unique and so important in the hosting world today that I don't think there's a downside to using them. And I can put on my tinfoil hat and think about scenarios where it would not work out for us or anyone trying to build on Cloudflare, but I just don't think that those are realistic, and it's not something I'm going to worry about right now. And you shouldn't either.
Yeah, Cloudflare is such a good platform. It's really coming into its own, especially now. It seems like they're having a lot of good traction.
Yeah, they have a really solid engineering team and culture. It's surprising. Like, I'm surprised that I didn't get into it earlier. It feels like, where have you been all my life?
So there's something else I wanted to talk about. So you'd mentioned this earlier. Redwood JS, the original framework, had a lot of stuff built into it. it's providing a lot of direct integrations. I'm doing a lot of custom things around those integrations, and it made your velocity harder. So now you're building Redwood SDK to be a lot more modular, a lot like smaller core, trying to solve less problems all up front. But you also have this goal of like, oh, well, we want people to build like personal software. We want it to make it like easy and understandable and like let you solve the goals that you need to solve right away. So it's like, how do you balance the tension of baking things in because it's easy and people don't have to think about it? You can just be super opinionated and say, here's how you do X, versus like, we don't want to overload this with a bunch of complexity. And maybe we want to give people the flexibility to use whatever is appropriate for their use case, or whatever it may be. What's the balance between that, and how do you think about like putting things into core versus like not?
So for us, it pretty much hinges on the browser. If the browser offers something that can do what we want it to do, we will lean into that. And I'll give you an example, like with sessions, we're just using cookies and we're using Cloudflare's durable objects to store that session information. And then with authentication, we also provide WebAuthn. And I think that that's a really, really good solution that's future-proof. But you can use anything you want yourself. It's just that we're not handing that to you. Also, if it's like a commercial entity that's offering some kind of service, I'm very cautious of including that. Like if you have to configure it using some sort of secret key, I'm probably not going to add that as a default in the SDK. And I tell you why. The reason is like my brother is learning how to program. He's a technical guy. He's always wanted to code. It just didn't work for him. A couple of months ago, he came to me and he's like, "Hey, Peter, I built this thing." And I opened it up on my computer and it was a web page. And I was like, "What? How did you do this?" He's like, "Yeah, I used this thing called Cursor." I was still VS Coding back then. I used this thing called Cursor. I could speak to it and it could speak to me in a way that made it understandable. And I was like, "Where is this hosted?" And he said, "It's on Vercel." And then I said, "What's your database?" And he says, "It's Neon." And I was like, "Whoa, how did you make these choices?" He's like, "The AI made it for me." And I was like, "Interesting." It's like, "But it's costing me money." And I was like, "Okay, interesting. And he said it was also really difficult to go from development to production. And he didn't really understand the security implications of that connection between Vercel and his Neon database. And I was like, okay, there's something here that whenever you're connecting to an external service and you have to provide an API key or actually, let me back up a little bit. I like to think of it as if you're paying 5 taxes. So number one, you want to choose an authentication service. You go on the internet, you do a bunch of research, you figure out which one resonates with you in terms of price and brand and whatever you like. Then you sign up. Then you give them your credit card. Then you learn what the API does. You make it work locally. Then you make it work in production. Those are 5 different taxes that you have to pay before that service is actually usable in your day-to-day flow for building software. I don't want that. I think that that's really the hard part of what software is nowadays, is connecting all these services together. So if you have this just Cloudflare binding where it actually feels like it's on the machine that you're busy coding on, that feels like magic. And in the local development environment, the Cloudflare has provided an emulator called MiniFlare, and MiniFlare gives you access to database, durable objects, queues, even AI. So you give it your Cloudflare account when you sign in with this thing called Wrangler, and then you can access all the AI models in your local development environment, and you ship it to production, one command, PNPM release, and it's live and it's working. Like that was the most surprising thing for me, that when I shipped to production, it worked. But what was even more surprising for me was that I was surprised by that. It's like my expectation should be that it just works. But I've been sort of trained in the last like 20 years of my career that shipping to production means you're shipping something that's breaking, and then you subsequently try and fix it. And that hasn't been the case at all with Cloudflare. I'm like, well, it's working. And it's great. It's a great experience.